Hello and welcome to PTV World Special Transmission of Iqbal Day. Today marks the 142nd birthday of Allama Dr. Sir Muhammad Iqbal, who was known as a great thinker, philosopher, an inspirational person for Pakistan and for Muslims in the subcontinent before partition and even after partition. His work and his poetry and his philosophy is learned and loved all over the region as well as internationally in areas such as Bangladesh and Turkey and Iran and Europe. He is a renowned poet and thinker and philosopher. He shaped the thought of the creation of Pakistan, and Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah greatly respected him. He said that Sir Iqbal was undoubtedly one of the greatest poets, philosophers and seers of humanity of all times. He took a prominent part in the politics of the country and in the intellectual and cultural reconstruction of the Islamic world. His contribution to the literature and thought of the world will live forever, and that sums it up about the importance of Allama Iqbal for Pakistan and for all the Muslims in the subcontinent. So we're going to discuss this today with the guests that we have in our studio. We're very fortunate today to have with us Mr. Mohammad Ziauddin, who's a senior journalist, and also Professor Tahir Malik, who is a senior analyst, and we also have with us Mr. Nadeem Omar Tarar, who is a historian. Thank you all of you to being with us for being with us today on this program to discuss the work of Allama Iqbal. Sir, I'll start with you, Mr. Ziauddin. The work of Allama Iqbal, Dr. Allama Iqbal, can you just touch upon its significance for the Muslims of the subcontinent and for Pakistanis as an inspirational leader?
Well, yeah, if you look at the plight of the Muslims of subcontinent, say between mid 19th century to mid 20th century, you would see that they were taken as a defeated nation by the Britishers, the ruling colonialists, and the majority Hindus had taken them again as the same when they were the rulers. And they had this space between the Britishers and the Hindus. They created a space where both the colonialists and the Hindus would take advantages of all the available circumstances. And in that scenario, the Muslims were suppressed. And Muslims on their own also were in a state of mind which actually they were in a state of frustration, total frustration, and they were not ready to come out of their shells, which they had gone into during this period. So at that time, personalities like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, and then after that Sir Muhammad Iqbal, that the kind of language, the kind of inspiration, the kind of work Sir Muhammad Iqbal came out with, he had steered the entire Muslims of the subcontinent, and his work. He was a nationalist first.
Okay.
He was an Indian first. Then after having had that experience, dealing with the majority Hindus, he became a kind of a Muslim Ummah champion.
Okay, right.
And that's the reason why his work is read and appreciated even in Iran. In Iran, he is one of the most popular poets.
Right.
And then in Turkey, and now in almost in the entire Muslim world.
Right, okay. So in the light of today's events, I also wanted to add the opening of the Kartarpur corridor, which is very significant for Pakistan. That's also today on November 9th. Tomorrow is the 12th of Rabiul Awwal, the birth anniversary of our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. And today is Iqbal Day. Now, Allama Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, he had said about Baba Guru Nanak some very specific words, and he had dedicated a poem to him called Bangedara. And that in his poem, he said that a perfect man wakes up India from the dreams of ignorance. So, sir, can you please, Professor Tahir Malik, comment a bit about that and that poem of his that exalted Baba Guru Nanak on, this specific day when everybody's talking about him?
In Pakistan, last week I was listening to one of the opposition leader, and he said that this is in clash or in contradiction with the Iqbal's philosophy, the Kartarpur, opening of Kartarpur corridor. But in fact, you just cited the example of Iqbal's poetry, and within Iqbal poetry, Iqbal's worldview was global, and local. For example, he has also praised Russian Revolution and other developments in Europe and Middle East all over the world, but he celebrated Baba Guru Nanak as Punjabi Sufi poet. And if you look at the holy book of Sikh community, that is the Guru Granth, we have seen Baba, the contribution of Muslim Sufis too, Baba Farid and others. So in the similar same, in those times I've seen Iqbal recorded Guru Nanak as he was the one who also espoused Tawheed and the message, common message of the Sufism that was based more in the prism of humanity and peace and harmony between different, not only sects but interfaith harmony, tolerance. So the divide that was in before Baba Guru Nanak, it was the divide between the orthodoxy and the divide between Hindu fanatics and Muslim fanatics. And Baba Guru Nanak was a moderate Sufi thinker, Sufi personality who tried to bridge that gap, who tried to bridge. If you look at the history of Sikhism, they suffered persecution at the hand of the kings. Some of them were Muslim kings. So the message of Baba Guru Nanak was based on peace, love and harmony. So Iqbal praised that. He in fact praised and said that in Punjab it is a welcome sign, a personality like Baba Guru Nanak. So the today's opening, if we relate them, you see in South Asia, history, cultural and religion, they play a very significant role. And they have in the ongoing conflicts, we have seen they have played a negative role. The symbols and the divides between various community, communalization of politics have resulted due to the negative aspects of history, culture and religion. But if the answer to this present mess is the Sufi answer, and that Sufi answer is common among the Buddhist philosophy, among the Baba Guru Nanak and the Muslim Sufi poets, and in some of the Hindu mythologies. So the problems which the different communities are facing in India and Pakistan, they are political in nature. But the way forward is reverting back to the Sufi teachings that are the common ground between Iqbal and Baba Guru Nanak can be an answer.
Right, exactly. So, Dr. Nadeem Umar, now I'd like to ask you, as you're a historian, the life of Professor Dr. Allama Iqbal, how did that influence his thought process? He went overseas to study at Cambridge University and Trinity College, where he got his bachelor's, and then he went on to Germany to do his PhD. So, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Who were the people who influenced his thinking?
Yes, you know, Iqbal primarily he trained as a philosopher. You know, he wrote his doctoral dissertation from Munich University, as we all know, was on the Persian metaphysics. Right. So he dealt with a very strong, I would say, strong sort of philosophical ideas as part of his education, as part of his training. And mind you, he also was trained as a barrister.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So it's a, you know, if you look at Iqbal, it's a person with a rational mind, with a legal acumen, somebody who, you know, understands the philosophical, you know, principles, is a very logical mind, but at the same time, he expresses all of his philosophical ideas in a romantic manner, in the language of poetry. So I think Iqbal was a very extraordinary man as a person, that you know, having sort of been through so many diverse, I would say, you know, environment. You know, he responded, he brought everything together in a whole that is quite sort of unusual if you look at it. Right. So what we are saying is that Iqbal was studied in Lahore, right? He was a teacher, he was a professor, as you said. He was teaching in Punjab University, then he went abroad. When he went abroad, I think his interaction with this European philosophy was really a kind of a turning point for him.
Right. Okay, so then he sort of amalgamated his learnings there and then applied to the subcontinent what he thought was lacking in the Muslims, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yes, of course. He applied what he had learned through his critical interrogation of European ideas. You know, he was immensely, he responded to Goethe, his famous poem which talks about, you know, which Muslims, and he responded to that, and he in Payam-e Mashriq. So he was somebody who had personally met Bagassan while he was in Europe, and he had met many other philosophers of his own time, and he also responded to their ideas in Persian and Urdu language.
Okay.
So he's a man of a 20th century who is looking at the world, right? But at the same time, he's deeply and intimately concerned with his own, roots.
Right,
The
okay.
India that he lived in, the India under the British.
Right. So, Ziauddin Saab, now I'll come to you. His concern for the Muslims of the subcontinent was that he was concerned about why they were marginalized and they were not up to the same level as the British, the colonialists, as well as the Hindus, and that they were getting a lower status in the society. So, one of the main concepts that he came out with, which is so famous, which everybody has heard of, is the concept of khudi, self-awareness, self-reliance, self-confidence, etc. And he said that he wanted his readers, especially the Muslim audience, to develop their khudi or self to such a high degree that God would ask them what they wish their destiny to be. Now, this is beautiful and so deep. So, sir, can you please elaborate a bit about this concept of khudi and how it was supposed to influence Muslims at that time and for all time to come?
Yes, see, as the Professor said, that when he was exposed to the European, state of affairs in those days, the first industrial revolution was taking place, and it has the kind of work which the philosophers, European philosophers, were doing preceding to this first industrial revolution was fantastic, and that's when when Iqbal went to Europe and when he read these works of these great philosophers and also met them and also saw the differences, and that's perhaps when he developed this idea of self, khudi.
Do you think he found that lacking in the Muslims in some way or the
Obviously,
other?
there was the Muslims of subcontinent were a defeated, community, and they had gone into a shell, and all that they had as a fallback on was their religion, and they had gone into highly obscurantist, part, the obscurantist, system of our religion. Islam is the kind is known as is the modern religion. Islam, when Islam came into when the Prophet, peace be upon him, started teaching the Islamic religion, he presented it as a new modern religion,
Right.
modern philosophy, and that we had forgotten, that
Okay.
Muslims of the subcontinent had completely forgotten, and they had gone into a shell. They were totally, they had become totally obscurantist, and at that time, something had to be done to bring them out of that shell.
Okay.
And this Professor Dr. Iqbal did this with his work, and that is when the khudi was brought in. I mean, he that was the major theme of his work.
And that basically brings in to mind self-reliance. There's also following a certain set of principles, hard work. Everything is included in that concept
You
of
have to
khudi.
stand on your own 2 feet. You
Yeah.
cannot depend on others. You
Yeah.
cannot depend on dole.
Yeah.
You have to come out of it and come out of your shell and then work on your own. to find a place in the comity of nation.
Right, okay. So, Professor Tahir Malik, now I'd like to ask you that following this, he was also he was hugely involved in the Pakistan movement. He influenced Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah a lot. He went and actually brought him back, convinced him to come back to India to become the president of the Muslim League. So, can you elaborate on his role in the Pakistan movement as well?
Yes, but a light comment on that. We were discussing about Khudi self-realization.
Yes.
To understand this, we have to understand during those time it was Muslims were living under colonialism, and they have been subjugated, they have been colonized, and the behavior of the elites in Muslim societies was opportunist. They did not care about the plight of the masses, and they have compromised on the ideals. So
And
you see,
maybe a little bit of lethargy. Was to
lethargy
be
plus
seen.
they were, Iqbal was belonged to a modernist elite, and he was looking at the role of religious elite, the role of feudals in the society. फिरका बंदी है, कहीं जाते हैं, क्या ज़माने में पनपने की यही बातें, and the kind of behavior, the direction of the politics of Muslims in India, that they are suffering worst underdevelopment. And yet elites, upper middle class elites in Muslim societies are aligning with the British colonial rulers for their own petty interest,
Okay.
for material and economic. As far as your question about Pakistan movement, we have to understand that the impact of British colonialism resulted in three kinds of elite. One is modernist, the other is religious, the third is opportunist. So Sir Syed, Iqbal and Jinnah, they were modernist elite, they were middle class. So their early education was religious, but with the interaction with the Western education, scientific thinking, nationalism, democracy, these ideas were not rejected. So when the British initiated limited form of democracy and some sort of rights, the first political party was Congress. It was the failure of Congress to satisfy or appear to Muslim as a secular political party safeguarding the interest of both Hindus and Muslims. This failure resulted in the creation of Muslim League. As far as the role of Iqbal is concerned, it represents the failure of Congress, and which was not unfounded, starting from partition of Bengal to separate electorates and number of other issues. There was a strong feeling, perception that Congress is by design a political party that is more loyal to Hindu interest. And what I see the most critical role of Iqbal is that when Muslim League lost election of 1936-37, and it lost badly. So Jinnah was very disappointed and he left India. He went for a time being to settle in England. So in those times there are on record the letters of Iqbal to Jinnah, and these letters have very academic philosophical value, in which Iqbal is saying that don't leave the Muslims in India without a leader, and the failure of Muslim League lies in its manifesto, and the direction of Muslim League is not clear. It is not representing the interest of Muslims. It is not articulating the root cause of Muslim underdevelopment and backwardness. And he mentioned the word in one of the letters as roti. Unless and until Muslim League represents the issue of roti, the issue of Muslim poverty, it will fail to become a mass political party. So it was the efforts of Iqbal that Jinnah came back, and he was convinced with the case of Pakistan. Unfortunately, Iqbal died in 1938, but Jinnah carried this whole movement, continued in 1940. The Lahore represented Lahore resolution, which is referred as Pakistan resolution, very well articulated the case for Pakistan.
Okay, right. So now I would like to ask Dr. Nadeem Umar. Now Iqbal had a very strong message for the youth, and this is very important right now for Pakistan's youth as well. He encouraged the youth to aim high and for the very best in life, and He said, I have love for those youngsters who will pull the stars down. And he talked about stars and heavens and soaring and all, you know, to great heights and everything. And then as far as facing hardships and difficult times are concerned, he told them, don't be frightened by these furious, violent winds, O eagle. These blow only to make you fly higher. And these are very inspirational words for the youth. So can you please elaborate a bit upon his message to the youth?
I think this message to the youth is best captured by his last collection, Javed Nama, which is, you know, in a way addressed to his son by the name Javed. And through that poetry, he actually then reflects on, it's some kind of a retrospective glance on his own ideas. And then he you know, culls the most significant part of his vision into those you know, into that poetry, which is actually a eternal message for the Pakistani youth. But it is unfortunate in a way that that particular messaging is not you know, getting across. I mean, we have seen that Iqbal is widely quoted, the name is known to the youth, but it is its message, it's really the philosophical core or the spiritual core of the Iqbal poetry. His vision has not been, I would say, not been shared with the succeeding generation as it should have been. Iqbal has become more of an founding figure, a very holy figure that we all look up to, but we understand very little of him.
Yes, exactly. As we were speaking before the program, I had a discussion with my daughter who would sing in her school as a small child. Now she's in A-levels. The Lab Pe Aati had the poem about children that he had written, and she was saying how the children had no idea what it meant, and its meaning is so beautiful. It's telling them to glitter like stars, and he's telling them to be flowers, like flowers in the garden that brighten up the whole country, and you know, their vision for the future and their dream. So, Sir Ziauddin Sahab, what is, in your opinion, why is this message of Iqbal lost to us right now, and to the Muslims and to Pakistanis in general?
So the failure has been our education system. See, now today they say, I mean, according to an estimate, about 200 million children are out of school. And those who are in school, the kind of education they are being given, both in the government public schools and the private schools. The government public schools are totally lost. There is nothing. They are being, there is no teaching there. The teachers are properly not trained themselves. And the kind of syllabus they are given, I mean, the kind of the syllabus that we have developed keeps them ignorant, even after they have graduated. In the first place, I don't think they even teach how to write and read properly. I mean, that has been the major reason why we have forgotten Iqbal. I mean, nobody even from the Urdu medium school would know Iqbal properly.
Right. Okay.
Would
So
know Ghalib properly.
how can we ensure that knowing Iqbal now is actually something that we put into practice? Because his ideas and his philosophy is so elevated, and if people were to follow that in Pakistan, I think we would come out of a lot of the issues that we're facing.
Every nation has a persona. For that persona to develop, you have to have heroes. You have to have role models. Unless you teach the children who are your heroes, who are your role models, you cannot develop a persona, Pakistani persona. Who's a Pakistani? Even today, we are confused. We don't know who's a Pakistani, what kind of characteristics a Pakistani has, what kind of a personality a Pakistani
sort of identity
has.
building.
Identity. That has been the failure has been the education system. Unless we focus on that. Today we say that about, we have a huge bulge of youth, the country. Mostly they are ignorant. They don't know almost anything about even their own country, about their own, the place of their birth. They don't know.
Right.
And I mean, if you look at, I mean, talk to these youngsters, you'll come to understand that they don't have any sense of belonging to this country.
True.
How do you, I mean, develop that sense of belonging unless you have some kind of a routings.
Right.
I mean, routines you develop only through education. I mean, you've been, unless you're taught, who are you?
Right.
You can't develop that. I mean, that is the failure of the education system.
Okay, so Professor Tahir Malik, now in your opinion, how would Professor Dr. Allama Iqbal's vision, would Pakistan's education system be? Would it be a system it's involved in the character building of the students as well as imparting them with all the different subjects, etc.?
I think not only Pakistan but every education system requires character building, values, but it should be objective, it should be rational, and it should be according to the needs and requirement of our time. The kind of Iqbal we are preaching to our students in syllabus, it develops no interest within students. I think environment is missing in our syllabus, civic sense is missing in our syllabus, world history is missing in sir. Iqbal, according to his times, the global politics, its the various concepts and philosophy. For example, even at university level, the students, graduate students don't know that the philosophical work of Iqbal, reconstruction of religious thought in Islam. And the simple questions like why Iqbal and Qaid-e-Azam, they did not participated in Khilafat movement, why they considered Mustafa Kemal Ataturk more in conformity with the present day challenges facing to the Muslim world, say that the Turkey should emerge as a republic and democratic republic, a secular republic, more important than living in under the past in caliphate. It's a order which was to.
So it was a modern vision of Islam, a
So
forward-looking
the modern
Islam.
vision of Islam and the modern vision of Iqbal, there are elements in Pakistan which are fearful of this modern image, and they are still suppressing the rights of people, the feudals, the religious leaders, and those people who are suppressing the rights of people. For example, our friend Mr. Tarid was describing the Iqbal's message to youth. One of the basic parameters or philosophy of Iqbal was जवानों को पीरों का उस्ताद कर, खिरत को गुलामी से आज़ाद कर. So the talent in youth we are suppressing, we are not giving them rights in terms of job. For example, if I am in a university, we are still hiring retired people in key positions, and it is illegal according to the decision of Supreme Court. So here this one law is direct in contradiction with the message of Iqbal. Second thing, khirat ko gulami se azad kar. Still I think that despite the fact that we have gained independence and there are many decades, more than 70 years, the colonial mindset is not over in our institutions, in our society, in our social behavior. So this is directly in contradiction with teaching of Iqbal. So for example, if we want to revive or translate the dreams of Iqbal into reality, then we have to abolish feudalism, then we have to abolish these colonial structures, and then we have to, for example, one thing we are misinterpreting Iqbal is that Iqbal was anti-democratic. And a large number of our youth still believes, despite the fact that Iqbal was a member of a political party, he held and he was a office bearer, president of Punjab Muslim League, he even contested election. So how can a political mind or a political person can be anti-democratic if he is a part and parcel of a political party? So such kind of misconceptions by our elites, and they have portrayed according to their own needs. They have tried to build a picture of Iqbal and Jinnah which suits their own petty interest and their own needs and requirements.
So Iqbal is basically misunderstood by a lot of people.
But I think students have much more interest when they try to discover in English medium schools, for example, and they say India has Tagore and Britain has Milton and Shakespeare. So it is the rediscovery of Iqbal. Much more interest I have seen, and for this generation, and even our pop singers are re-singing various poetry, the poems of Iqbal, and this shows. And even in Nadeem Saab can say the fine art students, they are portraying Iqbal's poetry in a very creative work.
Yes, absolutely.
So, they, on the one hand, the elite, we are not highlighting the true message of Iqbal. On the other hand, there is a lot more interest by younger generation, which the state has no role. Obviously, it is their own effort to rediscover Iqbal according to the needs and requirement of time.
Right. So, Dr. Nadeem Umar, now in your opinion, how can we further enhance the knowledge and learning that we can gain from Dr. Iqbal's teachings?
I think so many useful suggestions have been already been given by Malik Saab. I think one of the fundamental reasons that Iqbal has not find his rightful place in our thoughts and mind is his status as a state ideologue. That has put off a lot of people.
Okay.
I mean, it's like it's like if something is coming through a compulsion, you would hardly like to appreciate it. So I think by these, though the state ownership of Iqbal has led to the consolidation of his message, there's a Iqbal Academy which generates lots of
And he's a
publication.
national poet.
And he's a national poet. There's a lot of attention in scholarly terms on Iqbal. But again, then Iqbal is not somebody who is looked at, as offering solution to the contemporary challenges. The youth, which is facing whatever challenges, they don't look up to him. They don't read their poetry to find answers.
Right.
For instance, if you look at the Iqbal poetry, a whole lot is in Persian, right?
Yes.
And you would know that there is a street in Iran, Iqbal Lahori Street.
Okay.
Iran really appreciates the Iqbal's poetry in Persian language. Iqbal is also celebrated in Afghanistan. It has a massive following in Turkey. As you would also know that Iqbal has traveled across the national borders unaided by the state, right? Whereas Iqbal is also open to multiple uses. If you are a right-wing politician, you will find something to quote from Iqbal. And if you are a left-leaning Marxist, you will also find something to quote from Iqbal.
So, it's very diverse.
So Iqbal is very diverse, and Iqbal has evolved. I mean, if you think in terms of his philosophical ideas, he started as a Hegelian, as a neo-Hegelian. That's what he wrote his dissertation around. And then he completely abandoned Hegel and moved on to, let's say, Nietzsche, but not then adopting Nietzsche, because Nietzsche's Superman is not equivalent to Iqbal's, Iqbal's idea of a super being, because they are different, they are placed in different ideological contexts.
Right.
So Iqbal is a Ashiq-e-Rasool. He's fond of Prophet. He celebrates the state created by the Prophet for the Muslim, Medina ki Riyasat.
So, it
But
will even
still,
appeal to the religious masses.
yes, he appeals to the religious masses, but still, he is somebody who is well versed with the European ideas. He is not averse to change. He draws in terms of his poetry, he draws on the classical, vocabulary of Persian poetry, but then also abandons it by following the political themes through his poetry. So he's a philosopher who is using poetry to articulate his ideas, and also a poet who is using philosophical ideas to actually share his message, which goes beyond borders. I mean, if Iqbal were not, let me put it this way, if Iqbal were not a national poet of Pakistan, still he will have his place in the world of ideas. He will have his place in the, in the in the knowledge production in the Islamic world. He has resonated widely because he was a cosmopolitan figure.
Okay.
He wasn't narrow-minded nationalist. He wasn't ardent follower of Greek philosophy. He was critical of West, but also inspired by the West.
Okay.
So he had that position that I think we hold today. We use English language, but we don't want to be slave to the English. So that is the kind of relationship which I think Iqbal had with the world,
Right.
and we still keep on that legacy and remember him in those terms
Right.
as a man of his own time. His vision is still something that echoes with our echoes in the contemporary world, and we can take cue from him. Youth get inspiration through popular music, which draws, as Malik Saab was saying, on Iqbal's poetry. A lot of Iqbal is in the process of translation into music,
Right.
translation into painting, translation into other world of ideas which are not authorized by the state. State and protection or promotion of Iqbal is one thing. Public ownership, intellectual ownership of Iqbal is something else.
Right.
And sometimes they don't go hand in hand.
Absolutely. So the main point here is that with Iqbal, there's something for everyone to take away from it, whether it's women, children, youth, and the entire population, whether religious or modern or anything like that. So Ziauddin Sahab, now his concept of the Medina ki riyasat, the state of Medina, and his reverence of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. Let's just touch upon that a little bit before the program comes to an end, because this is something that Prime Minister Imran Khan has also quoted about Iqbal, and that he had said that Muslims are going to elevate and improve themselves by following the model of the state of Medina. So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, when you talk about Riyasat-e-Medina and then give your economy to the IMF, you don't reach Riyasat-e-Medina. They're two different things. So you have to be very careful when you talk about Riyasat-e-Medina. You have to understand the concept itself. So Misaq-e-Medina, which
The
you
Charter
have to
of
read
Medina,
it.
yeah.
You have to understand it. Unless you do that, you simply should not be talking about Misaq-e-Medina. And when you keep on talking about Misaq-e-Medina without giving a kind of a meaning to this, modern meaning to this, you simply waste your time.
But as a welfare state, he was talking about the state of Medina as a welfare state, taking care of its people, where everybody has a right to a livelihood.
So when you're talking about welfare state, you cannot say that I'm going to give people the right to create wealth. So you have to be very careful on that. You create inequality when you give right to the people to create wealth. When you say that greed is good, you create a kind of inequality. You have to be very careful on that.
Right, fair enough.
You have to be very careful. How do you bring equitable distribution of the resources you create, the wealth you create? So you have to give some kind of real meaning to this Riyasat-e-Medina before you start talking about it.
Right. So, Professor Tahir, now I'd like to ask you now, the President of Pakistan, Dr. Arif Alvi, said that in order to face and to overcome our prevailing challenges for Pakistan, it's important to revert to the message of Allama Iqbal. So how can we use his message to overcome the difficulties that we're facing as a nation right now?
It is one is related to Khudi, and if we the economic connotation of Khudi is self-reliance, self-dependent, instead of relying on foreign loans and other. And a concerted effort should be attached to generating our own resources, and the elitist lifestyle of our elite is not in conformity with the teaching of Iqbal. The second thing is nationalism. The state should promote nationalism. It is the Pakistan first. You see, in Mr. Ziauddin Sahab was saying that Iqbal represented Ummah. There is no doubt about it. But in his last years, he had a academic debate with Hussain Ahmad Madni, in which he said he is convinced of this nationalism, nation state, and Muslims of India. Why partition of India is necessary? So it is the survival of Pakistan as a self-reliance, self-dependent state. And the third message which I draw from Dr. Arif Alvi's message and your question is the reforms, the kind of reform. And Mr. Ziauddin Sahab was discussing the idea of Medina ki Riyasat. Interestingly, 1946, party manifesto of Muslim League did talk about land reforms. And Iqbal also said, जिस खेत से दैका को मैसर नहीं रोज़ी, उस खेत के अरखोशे गंदम को जला दो. एंड दैका हो किसी कब्र का उगला हुआ मर्दा, पोशीदा कफन जिसका भी ज़ेरे ज़मीं है. So he said it is the unchecked and ruthless powers of the feudal lords have resulted in Muslim underdevelopment and Muslim poverty. So this chapter of land reform,
So
it
there's
remained
no
part
place
of
for feudalism in
no
Iqbal's
place.
Pakistan.
So if
Okay.
Mr. Arif Alvi, our respected president, is wants to really translate Iqbal's dream into reality, he should initiate land reforms, abolish feudalism. This is the only way forward, and it is in Medina ki riyasat also, it is the redistribution of the wealth among the poorest of the poor. It is the responsibility of the state, and the Medina ki riyasat, the test case of Medina ki riyasat is from the national budget. If we are spending less than 2% for education and health, how can we create a social welfare state for the poor people of Pakistan? This is the real dilemma.
So is this one of the reasons why we don't see Iqbal's philosophy flourishing in Pakistan? He was also against all forms of totalitarianism, whether it was religious or political or cultural, in any form. So is this one of the reasons why we haven't seen it sort of flourish in Pakistan? So what are your final thoughts about this?
I think, like all poetry, it has a pragmatic vision to it, but poetry is something that is inspired as an ideal, right? It has a blueprint, a pragmatic way to go about it, but it has to be celebrated as an ideal, as an ideal that we all look up to. We may not be able to achieve what Prophet has been able to achieve, because obviously, he was a superhuman according to Iqbal's vision, and we are still the ordinary mortals. But we should all strive towards it. I think, as I said before, this ideological misuse of Iqbal, if it has to be could be transformed into more dynamic use of Iqbal, not just as a national figure, but as a humanist who lived in his own time and has actually created these beautiful ideas expressed through this beautiful poetry, translated in so many languages, that we need to own up to. It's our cultural heritage. It's not just the ideological side of Iqbal that we have to own up to. Also his literary cultural heritage that we need to celebrate.
Right, okay, it has to be put into practical life also. Thank you so much, Ziauddin Saab, for being with us today, and Professor Tahir Saab and Dr. Nadeem. Thank you all of you for joining us today and discussing this very important topic on Iqbal Day. Thank you, viewers, for joining us today. That's all for the program today on Iqbal Day. And as we have just spoken, Allama Iqbal's poetry and philosophy has a little bit for everyone, whether it's women, children, minorities. Everybody can take away something from it. It needs to be more widely spread amongst our education curriculum and amongst the public. Thank you for joining us again. Bye-bye for now.